Hello friends. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My sister had just given birth to twins when everything in my life quietly began to collapse. It was a Friday in early March of 2024. I was on the phone with her, laughing about how she had not slept in 4 straight days, teasing her about the chaos of newborn life when my doorbell rang. I remember glancing at the clock, just after noon. At the time, I was living alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm downtown. I was 34 years old, and by every definition that mattered, my life was stable, predictable, safe. My days followed the same rhythm. Wake up at 6, hit the gym before work, clock out by 5. Come home to my golden retriever, Murphy, and spend most weekends helping my father restore his old Chevy pickup in his garage outside the city. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous, nothing that would ever make me feel like I was being watched. When I opened the door, 2 strangers stood in the hallway. They were dressed in dark suits, not flashy, but deliberate. The kind of clothing meant to blend in while still signaling authority. Both carried themselves with that stiff, controlled posture you usually only see in movies about federal agents. The taller one spoke first. "Sir, I'm Special Agent Daniel Novak. This is Agent Mara Brennan. We're with the FBI." I told my sister I'd call her back. I never finished that conversation. Agent Brennan's eyes briefly scanned the street behind her before she looked back at me. That alone made my stomach tighten. Without asking why they were there, I stepped aside and let them in. They sat on my couch, declined water. Novak pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and placed it on my coffee table. Then he said something that instantly rewired how I understood my own life. He explained that the FBI had been investigating a dark web marketplace, one of those hidden sites where people claim to hire contract killers. Most of them are scams, he said. Criminals exploiting desperation, stealing cryptocurrency from people who believe violence can solve their problems. A data breach had exposed thousands of requests, and my name was in the database. Not as the buyer, as the target. Someone had uploaded photographs of my apartment building, my car, my daily running route through a park 3 blocks from my home. They had paid nearly $8,000 in Bitcoin to have me killed. I laughed at first. It had to be a mistake. Novak opened the folder. He laid the photographs out one by one. My Subaru Outback, parked in its usual spot, photographed from across the street. The entrance to my building, the same potted cactus my neighbor kept by the door clearly visible. Then a photo that made my breath catch. It was me, walking Murphy through Coronado Park. I was wearing a blue windbreaker I had bought the previous winter. The angle suggested the photo had been taken from one of the benches near the playground, close enough to capture the stubble on my jaw. The timestamp read February 12th, less than a month earlier. I stared at that image, trying to remember the morning, trying to recall if I had noticed anyone watching me. I couldn't. That was the worst part. Someone had been close enough to photograph me in public, and my instincts had never warned me. Agent Brennan asked if I had enemies. The question almost made me laugh. Real enemies didn't exist outside of crime shows and podcasts. I told her I couldn't think of anyone who would want me dead. No bitter exes, No business disputes, no family drama. My life was aggressively ordinary. Novak then asked if I had ever used the dark web, bought anything illegal, drugs, weapons. No, I said, absolutely not. And I meant it. He nodded and explained something worse. The account used to place the hit had been created using my name, my email address, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. Whoever did this hadn't just wanted me dead. They wanted it to look like I had ordered it myself. The agent stayed nearly 2 hours, asking about co-workers, neighbors, routines, whether I noticed strange vehicles, whether I ever felt followed. I answered everything, but my mind kept drifting back to the photographs. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Before they left, Novak handed me his card and told me to call immediately if anything felt off. He suggested changing routines, staying with family, installing security cameras. Brennan added, almost casually, that the marketplace was likely a scam. That didn't help. The next day, I called in sick and spent hours digging through my digital life. Credit reports, social media, old posts, anything that might explain how a stranger knew my movements so precisely. Nothing stood out. By noon, I convinced myself it had to be a data breach. That theory lasted exactly 6 hours. When I checked my mailbox, I found a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just my name printed neatly on the front. Inside was a photograph. Me again. This time sitting inside Frontier Restaurant, mid-laugh, a half-eaten burrito on the table, taken from near the entrance. On the back, written in careful block letters, "You should choose slower." I read it over and over. This wasn't intimidation. This was intimacy. I called Novak, left a voicemail. Then I checked every lock in my apartment while Murphy followed me like it was a game. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Novak asked me to bring the envelope to the FBI office. Brennan examined it while Novak took notes. Fingerprint analysis came back empty. Security cameras near my mailbox had missed everything. Whoever this was, they knew what they were doing. I took 2 weeks off work, installed cameras, changed locks, parked in different spots, stopped going to the park. Everyone became suspicious. Then came the second envelope, a night photo of my apartment building, my living room window circled in red. The message read, "New locks won't help." That's when I broke. I left the city and went to my father's place, 40 minutes outside Albuquerque. Isolated land, clear sight lines. A German shepherd named Duke who barked at everything. For a few days, I felt safe. Then I found another envelope on my car windshield. This one showed my father's house. The message, "Family is nice. Shame to involve them." That's when I told my dad everything. He didn't panic. He loaded a shotgun. He called his neighbor, a retired sheriff named Hector, who helped set up trail cameras around the property. We lived like we were under siege. The break came from my sister. She received an envelope too, but she checked her doorbell footage, and she caught him. A man in a gray hoodie. The FBI ran the image. His name was Theodore Sills, a former IT contractor from my company, fired years earlier for accessing employee files. He believed I was responsible. They arrested him 2 weeks later. Inside his apartment was a shrine, photos, maps, notes. He never intended to kill me. The dark web hit was theater, psychological torture. He wanted to watch me unravel. He's awaiting trial now. I moved back eventually, but I'll never look at my mailbox the same way again. Because for 3 weeks in 2024, I learned what it feels like to be hunted by someone who knows everything about you. Curiosity has always been my most dangerous flaw. My wife, Bethany, used to joke that if we were ever trapped in a horror movie, I would be the first one dead. The guy who just had to open the door, had to investigate the sound coming from the basement, had to know what was hiding in the dark. She wasn't wrong. By the time I graduated college in 2015, curiosity had already cost me 3 laptops and more sleepless nights than I could count. Not because I was reckless in real life, but because I couldn't stop digging online. I wanted to understand what existed beyond the surface web, the parts of the internet that never showed up on Google, the markets, forums, and communities that operated without rules or accountability. I told myself it was harmless. I worked as an IT consultant for a mid-sized insurance company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I paid my taxes. I lived in a quiet neighborhood. I wasn't buying drugs or weapons. I wasn't ordering anything illegal. At night, after Bethany fell asleep, I would sit in the spare bedroom with a VPN running, Tor browser open, and just explore. That's the lie tourists always tell themselves. They think they can leave whenever they want. It was a Thursday night in March of 2022 when I crossed a line I didn't even know existed. The temperature outside had dropped into single digits. Our old Victorian house groaned and shifted as the wind pushed against it, every creak sounding like a warning I chose to ignore. Bethany was visiting her mother in Arizona, so I had the house to myself. Just me, the glow of my monitor, and a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I was browsing a forum dedicated to exotic animal trade, the kind of place where people casually discussed buying tiger cubs, rare reptiles, and endangered birds smuggled out of South America. Disgusting, illegal, but not unfamiliar territory for me. Then I saw a thread buried near the bottom of the page. Premium cuts, verified suppliers only. At first I assumed it was about rare meat, bush meat, endangered species sold to rich collectors. I clicked without thinking. That click became the worst decision of my life. The forum layout changed instantly. Gone were the images and flashy banners. This section was stripped down. Black background, gray text, no avatars, no emojis, just words. There were around 50 active users. Every username was a meaningless string of letters and numbers. At first, the posts seemed ordinary in a sick way. Discussions about shipping logistics, complaints about packaging, arguments over quality and freshness. One user mentioned that a shipment from Nevada arrived in poor condition. Another replied with tips about temperature control during transport. I read with detached curiosity, the way you watch a documentary about criminals you'll never meet. Then something felt wrong. The weights didn't make sense. Someone requested a young female under 90 pounds with healthy teeth. Another user offered 2 males, early development stage, sourced from the Midwest. A moderator posted guidelines instructing sellers to photograph inventory without showing identifying features. Faces had to be obscured, but body condition needed to be clearly visible for quality assessment. I read that sentence 3 times. Then my stomach dropped. These people weren't talking about animals. My chair slammed into the wall as I pushed back from my desk. My mouth went dry. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to close the browser, shut down the computer, and pretend none of this was real. Instead, I kept reading. The forum had an archived section going back years. Categories labeled available inventory, supplier reviews, successful deliveries, and one that made my hands shake. Retired stock. I clicked. The older posts used even heavier code language. Words like livestock, breeding potential, shelf life. but patterns emerged quickly. Suppliers discussed acquisition costs by region. Rural areas were preferred, less attention. Fewer questions when someone disappeared. A user complained that sourcing from the foster system was becoming harder due to increased oversight. I had to close my eyes to keep from throwing up. Then I saw the photograph. Most images were deleted for security reasons, but one had slipped through in a thread from 2018. It showed an empty room, concrete walls, a drain in the floor, harsh fluorescent lighting, a metal table positioned directly over the drain. Leather restraints were bolted to the sides. No blood, no people, nothing graphic. And somehow, that made it worse. Below the image, a comment read, "New facility looks clean. Should increase processing capacity by 40% this quarter." I stared at that photo until my vision blurred, desperately trying to convince myself it could be anything else. A veterinary clinic, a slaughterhouse, some industrial workspace. I knew better. That room was built for one purpose, and real people had been taken there. I should have stopped. I should have reported it immediately. But something else caught my eye. Specific locations, dates, highway numbers. One user mentioned a pickup near a truck stop outside Tucson in November of 2017. I opened a regular browser window and searched the date. It took less than a minute to find the article. A 17-year-old girl, last seen at that exact truck stop. Case unsolved. On the forum, someone had described her as fresh product. I spent the rest of the night cross-referencing forum posts with missing persons databases. By sunrise, I had matched 7 cases. A 19-year-old from rural Kansas, twin sisters from Minnesota, a homeless woman in New Mexico whose disappearance barely made the news. These weren't coincidences. They talked about people the way distributors talked about meat. The system was designed to target the invisible. By mid-morning, I compiled everything into a document. Screenshots, links, timelines. I hadn't eaten. My body ached. My hands shook. Calling the local police felt useless. This was federal, multi-state, possibly international. I called the FBI tip line. They asked questions, took notes, promised a call back. 5 days later, they asked me to come in. I spent 3 hours in a gray room answering questions. When I showed them my research, their tone changed. They already knew parts of it. 3 months later, I saw a news article, a raid, a compound, multiple arrests. They never mentioned the forum. They never called me again. I deleted Tor, canceled my VPN. Bethany never asked why. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder how many forums like that still exist, quietly operating while the rest of us scroll our phones and pretend the world is safer than it really is. I still remember the exact moment when curiosity crossed the line and turned into something I could never undo. It was late May in Michigan, the kind of spring where the air still carried a trace of winter, and the campus felt half empty because most students were already mentally checked out for summer. My friend Owen Carter and I had just wrapped up our junior year in the cybersecurity program at a small state college, tucked between farmland and dying factory towns. We were 23, arrogant in the way only people who knew just enough to be dangerous tend to be. We thought we understood how the internet worked. We thought we understood criminals. We didn't. Our idea started as a joke during a late-night study session, fueled by gas station coffee and cheap pizza. We'd spent the semester analyzing case studies about online fraud, ransomware crews, and underground forums. Every lecture ended the same way. Criminal psychology, anonymity, moral detachment. What if, Owen said, half laughing, we studied them directly? That sentence should have scared me. Instead, it excited me. The plan we came up with felt clever, harmless even. We would create a fake service on the dark web, something vague enough to attract attention, but empty enough to be safe. No drugs, no weapons, no explicit crimes. Just promises, ambiguity. The kind of thing scammers used all the time. We told ourselves it was academic. We told ourselves it was controlled. We called it the Fixer. The site was minimal by design. Black background, white text, no images, no explanations. Just a short paragraph. Problem solved discreetly. No questions. No records. Below it sat a contact form and a single Bitcoin wallet address. That was it. We launched it on a Saturday morning from Owen's cramped off-campus apartment. The blinds were drawn even though no one could see what we were doing. Energy drink cans littered the desk. His old desktop hummed like it was constantly on the verge of overheating. For the first 3 days, nothing happened. A few nonsense messages. Someone asking if we sold pills. Another typing random characters like they'd fallen asleep on the keyboard. We laughed about it, joked that we'd built an elaborate digital mousetrap and caught nothing but bots. By Tuesday evening, we were already talking about shutting it down. That's when the first real message arrived. I remember the sound of Owen's mouse clicking stopped abruptly. He leaned closer to the screen, his posture changing in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Hey," he said quietly, "you need to read this." The username was a string of numbers and letters. No profile, no history. The message was long, carefully written. Calm. It described a woman living on Crescent Drive in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Her daily routine. What time she left for work. The route she took. The car she drove. A silver sedan, older model. The fact that she lived alone except for a small dog. Then came the sentence that drained the room of oxygen. I need her gone permanently. No anger. No insults. Just a request. They asked about pricing. Said money wouldn't be an issue. And as proof of seriousness, they had already transferred $500 worth of Bitcoin to our wallet. We checked. It was there. Cold. Real. Untouchable in a way cash never is. Neither of us spoke for a long time. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't role-playing. This was intent. Owen's first instinct was panic. He wanted to shut everything down immediately. Delete the server. Abandon the wallet. Pretend none of it ever existed. I wanted to do that too. But I couldn't stop thinking about the woman. About how someone had studied her life closely enough to write 3 paragraphs about it. About how easy it would be for a stranger to watch me without me ever noticing. We looked her up. She was real. I found her social media profile in minutes. A healthcare worker in her early 40s. Pictures of her backyard garden. Posts about local town meetings. Photos of her terrier curled up on the couch. She had a life. And someone wanted to erase it. That night, neither of us slept. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 more messages had arrived. The first came from someone in Illinois, asking whether we could make a business problem disappear. They included an address in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, a gym schedule, and a license plate number. They wanted it to look accidental. The second message was shorter. Just a name. An age, 15. A school address. Then a single question. Do you handle younger problems? I had to step away from the computer. I stood in Owen's kitchen with my hands gripping the counter, trying not to vomit. The walls felt too close. The air felt thick. These weren't fantasies typed by bored trolls. These were real people, sharing real information, asking real questions about real violence. By Thursday morning, we had received 11 messages. The Bitcoin wallet held nearly $3,000, all unsolicited. Owen hadn't left his apartment in 2 days. I barely ate. We argued in circles about what to do. Going to the police felt impossible. We had created the site. Even if it was fake, even if we never intended to do anything, explaining that to authorities felt like volunteering for our own prosecution. But doing nothing felt worse. Because if these people didn't find us, they would find someone else. Someone real. Someone willing. At 4 a.m. on Friday, another message arrived. Another life described in bullet points. Another deposit followed minutes later. That's when Owen broke. He said he couldn't carry this anymore. That every time he closed his eyes, he saw that school address. That age. We needed help. We reached out to Dr. Marcus Whitfield, one of our professors who had done consulting work for federal agencies. I emailed him asking for an urgent meeting about a research project that had gone wrong. He replied within the hour. Walking across campus later that day felt surreal. Students laughed. Frisbees flew across the quad. Summer plans filled the air. Meanwhile, I carried screenshots of murder requests in my backpack. Dr. Whitfield listened without interrupting. We showed him everything. The messages, the wallet, the logs. When we finished, he leaned back and rubbed his face slowly. Then he told us something I'll never forget. He said services like ours already existed, hundreds of them. Most were scams. Some were law enforcement traps. And the people sending messages didn't care which was which. Their intentions were real. He gave us 2 options. Shut it down and hope nothing happened. Or cooperate, quietly, through the proper channels. We chose the second. The following weekend felt endless. The messages kept coming. A custody dispute in Texas. A landlord conflict in Ohio. Threats framed as solutions from across the country. Each message was another reminder of how thin the line was between thought and action. On Monday, 2 federal agents arrived from Detroit. Calm, professional, not accusatory. They treated us like witnesses. They told us some of the requests matched active investigations, that our data could help stop people before they acted. We shut the site down that afternoon. Watching the server go dark didn't feel like relief. It felt like closing a door behind us, knowing something terrible still existed on the other side. That summer ended, but the feeling never left. I graduated, moved states, got a job in IT. But I don't look at people the same way anymore. The stranger behind me in line, the neighbor walking their dog, the coworker venting about their life. I wonder who among them has typed something into a hidden corner of the internet, hoping someone would fix their problems permanently. We ran the site for less than a week, over 30 requests, 30 people willing to pay for violence. That was our tiny corner of the dark web, and it still keeps me awake at night. Most people my age end their evenings half asleep on the couch, television murmuring in the background while they scroll endlessly through social media. I never developed that habit. Silence has always pulled at me more strongly than noise, and empty digital spaces have always felt louder to me than crowded rooms. I work as a digital archivist for the Bernalillo County Library System in Albuquerque, New Mexico. On paper, it sounds painfully dull. Metadata cleanup, legacy file preservation, outdated forum recovery. But what that job really gives you is access. access to obsolete systems, forgotten protocols, abandoned corners of the internet that most people don't even realize still exist. In 2018, my life quietly emptied out. My daughter left for college in northern Arizona that fall. The same year, my husband's consulting firm started sending him out of state for weeks at a time. 3 weeks gone, 1 week home. Suddenly the house felt too large, too quiet, filled with hours I didn't know how to occupy. That's when my curiosity drifted deeper. At first, my exploration of the deep web was strictly professional. Old community message boards, neighborhood forums that vanished when hosting companies shut down. I wanted to preserve pieces of local digital history that would otherwise dissolve into nothing. I taught myself how to navigate onion routing, how to read raw addresses, how to follow the ghosts of websites through mirrors and archive snapshots. My coworkers joked that I was becoming obsessive. They had no idea how accurate that word would become. On a Wednesday night in early March, long after midnight, I was following a chain of dead links that started with a photography forum from the early 2000s, the kind of place where people once shared blurry sunsets and debated lens brands. The trail bounced through half-broken archive services and forgotten mirrors until I barely remembered where I had begun. That's when the page loaded. It was a blog, or at least something pretending to be one. Plain white background, black text, Times New Roman. No images at the top, no navigation bar, no comments section. It looked like it had been built 20 years ago and never touched since. What stopped me cold was the date. The most recent entry had been posted 3 weeks earlier. Everything about the site screamed obsolete, yet someone was still updating it. The post was titled, "Lessons from February." I assumed it would be self-help rambling or experimental writing. Something amateur, something harmless. I started reading. Within 30 seconds, my body went rigid. The writing was fragmented, almost stream of consciousness. Thoughts dumped without structure, without concern for clarity. At first glance, it seemed vague. Phrases about mistakes, patience, timing. But the context felt wrong, unsettling. The author wrote about someone who didn't cooperate, about how that failure forced a change in plans. There were mentions of watching, waiting, adapting. Observation was framed like a skill that needed constant refinement. Then I scrolled. Between paragraphs were photographs, not of people, of objects. A single house key on a scratched wooden table, captioned with a date and the words, "Riverside Drive. Unsuccessful." A pair of running shoes, white with faded pink laces, photographed on what looked like a garage floor. November 14th, Cedar Hills Park. A thin silver bracelet with a butterfly charm resting on a dark surface I couldn't identify, labeled only with a date from January. My mouth went dry. I told myself it had to be fiction, some kind of art project. People create unsettling horror blogs all the time. The internet is full of them. But the deeper I went, the harder that explanation became to hold on to. The entries stretched back nearly 2 years, and they followed a disturbing pattern. The author would describe watching someone, learning routines, noting habits. Then there would be a gap of weeks. After that, a post evaluating what went wrong or what went right. The language was detached, clinical. She noticed more than expected. Neighbors' complicated timing. The window proved easier than anticipated, always followed by photographs, keys, jewelry, shoes, hairbrushes, coffee mugs with unfamiliar logos, each tagged with a date and location. My pulse hammered in my ears. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing everything down. Addresses, dates, descriptions. I needed to prove this was fake, that none of it aligned with anything real. It took less than an hour to find the first match. One October entry mentioned Ridgecrest Avenue. The name sounded local, familiar enough to search. I typed it into a regular browser with the word missing and the year. The result made me shove my chair back so hard it nearly tipped. A woman named Marla Benson had disappeared from Ridgecrest Avenue the previous October. 27 years old. Veterinary assistant. Last seen leaving her apartment early in the morning. Her car was later found abandoned near a trailhead outside the city. The case was still open. I pulled every article I could find and then went back to the blog entry. The author mentioned watching someone who walked a small dog every evening, someone who left blinds open at night, someone who drove a dark blue sedan. Marla Benson owned a Chihuahua mix. She lived in a ground floor unit. Her missing poster showed her beside a navy blue Mazda. I stared at the two sources side by side until the words blurred. I wanted it to be coincidence, but my gut knew better. I scrolled back to the photograph attached to that October entry. A single silver stud earring shaped like a tiny star resting on concrete. I searched for more photos of Marla and found an old social media account her family had kept public during the search. In nearly every picture, she wore the same small silver star earrings, a gift from her grandmother, according to one caption. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum, trying to convince myself I wasn't about to lose my grip on reality. Either this was an elaborate fantasy written by someone obsessed with true crime, or I had found something much worse. I didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table cross-referencing entries with missing persons cases. By sunrise, I had found 3 more matches. A woman who vanished from Sunset Terrace in August, a college student who disappeared near campus in December, a Jane Doe discovered outside city limits the previous spring. Details from the blog matched information never released publicly. The entry that finally pushed me into action was dated just 6 weeks before I found the site. It mentioned Lomas Boulevard, less than 3 miles from my own house. The author wrote about a new subject, someone predictable, someone whose building had poor security. There was a photograph of a keychain, a small leather strap with a brass charm shaped like the letter K. The note beneath it made my stomach drop. Copied easily while distracted. There were no missing person reports from that area yet, which didn't comfort me at all. It meant the person might still be alive. I called the Albuquerque Police Department that morning, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what I had found. After being transferred twice, I reached a detective in missing persons. He listened, politely, skeptically. He asked for evidence. I hadn't saved any. When I went back to retrieve the site, it was gone. The address led to nothing but an error message. Connection refused. It was like it had never existed. Weeks later, the news broke. A woman named Kara Nolan was reported missing from her apartment on Lomas Boulevard. No signs of forced entry. Car still in the lot. The keychain. The letter K. Everything after that blurred together. Statements, forensic analysis, federal involvement. They found her alive months later, locked inside a storage unit. The man responsible had no criminal record, no warning signs, just patience. They told me I helped save a life. But I know the truth. I found that site by accident, and there are others like it, still hidden, still active, still waiting. I check my locks 3 times every night now, and I never leave my blinds open after dark. Friday nights used to feel harmless to me. Quiet, predictable, almost boring in a comforting way. My husband, Marcus, was out of state for a technology conference in Columbus, Ohio, and wouldn't be back until Sunday afternoon. That left me alone in our house at the very end of Hollow Creek Lane, a quiet cul-de-sac tucked into a sleepy town outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. The kind of neighborhood where people argued more about lawn lengths than crime. I was 32, worked a stable job in commercial insurance, and lived a life that most people would describe as safe. That night, I had finished watching my shows, answered a few emails, and poured myself a second glass of red wine. Outside, December cold pressed against the windows, frosting the edges of the glass. That's when I remembered something my coworker Tara had mentioned earlier that week. She'd leaned over her salad during lunch and whispered, half joking, half serious, about her cousin messing around on the dark web. She talked about hidden forums, private communities, places where people shared things that were never meant to be seen. I laughed it off at the time, but alone in my kitchen, slightly buzzed, curiosity crept in. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want anything illegal. I just wanted to look, to peek behind the curtain, to see what all the whispers were about. That was my first mistake. Took almost an hour of searching guides, reading forums, and watching low-quality tutorials before I figured out how to access a dark web browser. The whole process felt clunky, outdated, like stepping back into the early days of the internet. Most of what I found was garbage, broken pages, foreign languages, empty directories. Then one link loaded instantly. The page was wrong. No logos, no branding. Just a black background, thin white text, and endless threads stacked on top of each other. Usernames weren't names at all, just long strings of numbers and letters. I started scrolling. At first, it felt like reading urban legends. Then my stomach tightened. There were threads discussing surveillance, not hypothetical, specific people. Photos attached, grainy images clearly taken from across streets, through windows, from cars parked too long. One post listed addresses, another listed daily routines. Leaves for work at 7:18 a.m. Garage opens at 6:42 p.m. Lights off by 11:30. I felt sick. I told myself it had to be fake. Some elaborate roleplay. Shock content meant to scare curious people like me. But I couldn't stop reading. 15 minutes passed, maybe 20. Finally, panic broke through the curiosity. I closed the browser, deleted everything, and shut my laptop like I could trap whatever I'd seen inside it. I poured another glass of wine and tried to laugh it off. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I was rinsing my glass in the sink when I saw the notification light up the counter. Unknown number. No text, just a photo. When I opened it, my breath left my body. It was my house, the front of it, taken from the street. Porch light on, my SUV in the driveway. Same crooked shadow cast by the oak tree near the curb. The angle was slightly tilted, like someone snapped it while walking. I stared at the image, my heart hammering, trying to force logic into place. Wrong number. Real estate mistake. Coincidence. Then another message came in. 3 lights on. Kitchen. Living room. Upstairs bathroom. I looked up slowly. The kitchen light above me glowed warm. The living room lamp was on behind me. I had left the upstairs bathroom light on. They weren't guessing. They were outside. Right now. My legs went weak. I grabbed the counter to keep myself standing. Every instinct screamed at me to run to the window, and something deeper told me not to move at all, to stay exactly where I was. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I tried calling Marcus. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I typed a message with shaking fingers. Call me now. Someone is outside. Then I dialed 911. Full signal. 4 bars. The call connected and dropped. Again. Nothing. I stood in my own kitchen, surrounded by familiar cabinets and family photos, and felt more isolated than I ever had in my life. That's when I heard it. A soft, metallic rattle. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then it happened again. Slow, deliberate. Someone was testing the front door handle, not knocking, not ringing, just turning it gently. Waiting. Turn. Pause. Turn. Like they were listening for me to react. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might pass out. I backed away, my mind racing, trying to remember if I had locked the door. I always locked the door. Always. But doubt is powerful when fear takes over. The rattling stopped. Silence filled the house, thicker than the sound ever was. My phone buzzed again. You shouldn't have visited. The meaning slammed into me all at once. The forum, the dark web. Somehow I had been seen, tracked, marked. I didn't understand how. I still don't. But I understood one thing clearly. Staying where I was meant waiting. I moved toward the back of the house, staying low, keeping away from windows. Our sliding glass door led to a small patio and a yard that backed into a narrow strip of wood separating neighborhoods. If I could make it outside, I could run to the Harrisons' house down the lane. I knew they were home. I slid the door open an inch. Cold air rushed in. Then my phone buzzed. Another photo. The back patio, taken from the tree line. In the reflection of the glass, I could see myself. My silhouette frozen, hand on the doorframe. The photo was taken seconds earlier. I slammed the door shut and locked it. They weren't in one place. They were everywhere. Watching. I collapsed to the floor, crawling into the only corner of the kitchen without windows, my knees pulled tight to my chest. I tried 911 again. This time, it connected. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me as patrol cars arrived. Officers searched the yard, the woods, the street. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs, no suspects. The phone number was traced to a burner bought in Illinois and already deactivated. The forum vanished. Gone. Like it never existed. 2 years have passed. We installed cameras, motion sensors, floodlights. I still check the footage some nights. Empty driveway, still trees, nothing moving. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the lights are on, I remember that photo. My silhouette. Proof that somewhere, somehow, someone was watching me and may still be.